Om Swastiastu. Hello everyone, welcome back with me, Chyntia Wulandari. Today I will continue to read this book. The Burden of Responsibility. Taking responsibility for our action is hard. Most of us, given the opportunity, especially when it's for a mistake or failure, would rather point the finger to someone or something else or assign blame to some external force than admit responsibility for it. When we were young, we got quite good at shirking responsibility mainly because we didn't like the consequences that we had to face, such as being grounded or not getting pudding for dessert. If we did something we were not allowed to do or break an object after being told not to touch it, it was always an accident or the cat did it, or because your older sibling made you do it. Growing up, there are so many things that we can attribute to in order to explain and justify the bad choices we have made and the lack of successes that we encounter. If we don't do well at school, it's because the teacher doesn't like me. When we don't enjoy our studies in college, it's because the parents insist that we go to that college and pursue that particular subject. Unhappy and pass over for our promotion at work, it's the fault of the college who takes credit for your work and the boss who's unfair. As a matter of fact, if we thought up the sources of all our troubles, the list can get pretty long, starting with it's the fault of my parents and the way I was brought up, not to mention all the other characters that pop up in my life and contribute to my feeling of being victimized, all the way to the fault of circumstances, society, the government, fate, bad luck, and even God's will. And when things get really bad, we can always throw our hands up in the air and say, it's not my fault. After all, I didn't ask to be born. When we blame outside influences and force for our feelings or of suffering, failure, and rejection, however, conversely, we also look to external sources to make us feel good, happy, and successful. It's not my fault that I'm sad because the person that I love doesn't love me back. Or it's hardly a wonder that my life is a mess. My father always told me that I would amount to nothing, or my mother preferred my brother or sister to me. It goes without saying that life throws us a bunch of stuff to deal with. Parents who don't really understand us, teachers who are not sympathetic, friends who secretly don't like us very much, lovers who find us boring, a job market that doesn't require our talent, a boss who is a bully. And then there are things such as trains that never run on time so we are always late, a high cost of living so we can never afford anything we want, and a broken society because the government is always corrupt. We can also learn to become quite good at coping with it. We bury ourselves in the loving embrace of a concerned supernatural being who promises to make everything good for us at the end of the day. Allow the web of fate to weave a net of illusion around us that absolves us from the burden of responsibility because everything is already laid out and predetermined, so we might as well accept whatever it conjures up for us. And we can also find ways to distract ourselves from having to take responsibility, such as succumbing to our addiction and losing our way in a maze of escapism, spending untold hours on the internet and the social media, following the lives and pursuits of celebrities and complete strangers. Thus, we remind children attached to our toys. There's come a time, however, faced with our own solitude that we realize that we and only we are ultimately responsible for our own being. It might be that we didn't choose to be born and we have no idea what we would become after we die, but we are responsible and in charge of the time given to us in between. It is a heavy burden, no doubt, and yet this realization can also be liberating. Taking responsibility is the path that allows us to develop and grow in our life. Being responsible and accepting the consequences of one's choices and actions are the features of a mature adult and wise human being, which is that we should aspire to in life. What life presents to us may be challenging, unpleasant, and unwelcome, but we need not react to them or at least accept them as inevitable. Whether our circumstances is difficult or not entirely depends on how we view the situation. And this view needs not to be permanent or unchangeable. We can choose how to approach it, and if it turns out to be unfavorable, it is completely within our power to change our mind and move on to something else or learn from it and try again. When we make of life as a series of conscious choices, or even as tests to challenge our capability as a human being and capacity to act, there is very little likelihood that what happens to us is due to change and circumstance. Instead, our very act can determine the course of circumstance and ultimately shape the direction of our life. In order to do this, however, we need to practice a good deal of self-reflection and learn to know ourselves better, so that over time we can make better choices and act in ways that are beneficial not only to ourselves but our surrounding. In other words, we become responsible people. This takes time and effort with perhaps a lot of mistakes along the way, but it might just give you a more genuine and lasting happiness in your life, as it liberates you to create the kind of life that you wish to construct during your time on the planet. What is reality? Why is it that different people see things differently, and not just about having a different opinion or different perspective about a particular problem, but also how we see a certain situation or even a person and object in front of our eyes. The chances are, when told to recall that situation or describe that person and that object, we will have different results or variation about what it is we are seeing. For example, describing a person, one might point out the color of the skin as the most memorable aspect. Another might take note of the clothes the person wears, and still another, the demeanor and the facial expression. Someone else might even remark on how that person makes them feel, such as attraction or suspicion. Of course, what we see and observe depends very much on all sorts of factors, such as the mood we are in on that particular day, or the types of reference and information we have stored in our head and our past experience. And the way we see things also depend on what interests me as a person, so that one particular aspect of that person is more prominent and memorable than the other parts, which make one wonder if there is such a thing as an objective reality out there which is not dependent on how we view this object. Or is it the case that what we see are mere interpretation of the way our mind is constructed? For example, even though there might be variation on the way we see an object or a situation, as a whole, we have general idea of what it is we are looking at. Unless we are deprived of the sense of sight, it is unlikely that we as a human would be in a disagreement about whether a particular piece of fruit is an apple or a banana. Even though we might differ on whether we like the fruit or not. It is because we human beings are endowed with five senses, and the position of these senses are set in such a way, with two eyes, nose, mouth, and ears on our head and fingers, and hands at the end of our arms, that we have a way of looking at the world in a particular way, much different, for example, to how a dog or cat might look at their surroundings, and no doubt extremely different to insects or other creatures that don't have or use the same sense that we do. Imagine what the objective reality of the world might be like to an octopus or to a termite. Perhaps there is no objective reality after all. Even the colors that we see are simply interpretations of how our brains react to the different light frequencies entering our eyes. And if you are colorblind, you might not even agree with what others claim to be a particular color. At the same things with sound. While for those endowed with synesthesia, when some of the senses get mixed up, such as when a particular sound also conjures up a certain color or smell or vice versa, the world must seem quite a stimulating place to live in.